Actual Fluency Podcast, episode 40, 10 lessons learned by doing 39 podcasts.
Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast, the podcast that gives you the tools and inspiration to learn languages faster and more efficiently. And now your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. I'm Chris Broholm as per usual, and this week it's a special episode. I'm going to be flying solo this time. It's been a while since my last solo episode, but I've been wanting to do a bit more of those. And in this solo episode, episode number 40, I've decided to take a look back at the previous 39 podcast interviews that I've done and see sort of what kind of lessons I've learned. And I've picked 10 different ones, and I'm going to go over them and talk about why they've helped me learn languages more efficiently. And if you're a new listener to the podcast, thank you so much for joining in. This is a language learning podcast, meaning that I interview language learners who are talented or who have special methods or ideas, or just able to share some kind of inspiration for the rest of us. I'm not an expert language learner myself. I'm trying to become one, but my sort of perspective is that I can learn something new every day, and every person I talk to is an opportunity to learn new things. So that's why that I'm doing this kind of lessons learned episode, because I feel like I've learned a lot from interviewing so many people, and it's kind of coming from a background of not being very good to learn languages myself. Today, I of course speak 3 languages quite well. I've learned Russian most of the year and can now, do some kind of conversation in it. Esperanto, kind of the same, but I'm in no way an expert on it. And the ways that I've done it, I don't think is particularly efficient either. But I think the input of a weak language learner, or at least a learning one, is quite valuable to the people out there who are trying to start their first foreign language, or, any foreign language that they want to learn. So that's why I'm excited for this episode 40 to take a look back and kind of share with you my 10 lessons learned from interviewing language learners. And of course, I could have said my 99 lessons learned, but I think that 10 lessons is probably, what I can make in the time that I have with you here today. So thank you for listening. And then, let's just dive right in. And I haven't really sorted these in order of what I think is important. So I think it's very difficult to sort language learning advice in any way. But the first thing that came to mind when I sort of did the research for this was get tutoring, and as fast as possible. And I suppose I could reword that to say get help. And, it doesn't mean that you're incapable of learning a language on your own. I'm sure a lot of people do and become quite successful. But the thing is, when you start tutoring sessions, at least when you find a great tutor, the game just changes. I mean, first of all, the tutor is helping you to pinpoint exactly what sort of problems you have. The tutor is there to explain concepts you don't understand. If you're learning a language that has a very different grammar. But I think the sort of overlooked advantage of having a tutor is that you're committing to meeting with that person. And of course, you might say, well, I don't have to automatically commit. But when I started tutoring, I told myself I would get a lesson a week at minimum. And that small commitment, and also very small money investment, because, if you go onto italki.com, the tutors that are on there are, very reasonably priced compared to if you went out to a language school in your local area, or even some of the internet schools, or, universities if you're in a country that pays tuition fees. So it's very economical as well. And basically, when I started getting a tutor for my Russian, it was just night and day in terms of my sort of productivity for Russian. It was just incredible, and I can't recommend it enough. And if you want to read more about my experience, the first time I had a tutoring session, because I was quite scared about it. I'm not going to lie about that. I was scared about, talking a foreign language with a tutor, meeting sort of strangers over Skype. It was kind of daunting for me. So I wrote up a blog post about it. And if you go to actualfluency.com/tutoring, I have a nice write-up there about my first time as a tutoring student and what I thought about it. So that will be my number one one sort of lesson learned from the people here on the podcast is, get help. And help doesn't have to be in the form of a tutor. You can do language exchanges. You can find local sort of language meetups. You can find friends and learn at the same time and then use each other to practice and be accountable. But the main point is just don't do this alone. Whilst it is possible, it's just not very efficient or recommendable. And it's also much more fun when you have more people around you. All right, so the second lesson that I've learned from interviewing, over 35 language learners is that you should never give up. And this is kind of a cliche, but the more I'm kind of persisting with Russian, the more I'm seeing the results. And I think a lot of the times when we fail at something, we don't fail because we don't know how to do things, or I don't think we fail because we just sort of stop doing it. I think we fail something because we give up. And we give up when it starts to get difficult or sort of loses the honeymoon effect. That is to say, when you learn a new language, everything seems exciting and you learn so much because every time you open the grammar book, there's something new for you. And every time you go on Memrise or Anki, you learn new words. And it's just an amazing feeling. But at some point, this honeymoon effect kind of disappears or dissipates. So it gets reduced. And that's the time when you need to really pull yourself together and persevere. Because if you consider anything in life, like running a marathon, writing a book, anything that takes effort, the only way you can fail is by giving up. I could do a marathon. I might not be able to run the entire way, and I might not be able to make, sort of conventional timing deadlines. But if you gave me enough time and I just didn't give up, of course I could do 42 kilometers or 26 miles or whatever it is. And that goes for language learning as well. It's like when you are into a language, and I think the sort of critical period might be a few months into it, and you're like, oh, this is so difficult. I don't understand the grammar, and I don't feel like I'm learning anything. And that's kind of when you should persevere, because just after that really hard time comes a nice feeling of achievement. Like when you understand that difficult grammar concept, or when you start seeing how a language works. Like for me in Russian, and I'm really sorry that I keep sort of comparing it to myself all the time, but I really think that it's important to experiment on yourself and then share your experiences. So what I say here and sort of my experiences that I share, it's only true for me. So you need to find out for yourself whether or not this works for you as well. But I can give you the inspiration to at least go and try it. So basically what happened with Russian for me was that I had this honeymoon period. It was exciting. It was new. And I was like, oh my God, this language is so cool. And then my motivation just died. It was flat out dead. And I only had motivation to sort of blog about learning languages. And one of my other points here in this episode is going to be about doing things, but I'll get back to that in a minute. And it basically means that I sort of de facto stopped learning Russian for a few months. Everything I did was just talk to people on Facebook or on Skype in Russian, just typing and using Google Translate and stuff. And it was really not that serious. And I would do barely any memorizing or anything. So what I realized then was, I need to keep going. I can't just give up. And the sort of the benefits as I was starting to understand Russian and I was understanding how the words work together, and suddenly I could make up Russian words without ever having seen them because I knew how the language was connected. I knew how an adjective ended. I knew how a noun usually ends. And that is just such a lovely experience. And also getting a tutor, getting a tutor for me was a total breaking point. Not a breaking point, a turning point. A breaking point would be quite disastrous. But no, it was a turning point for me for getting that tutor, because it really gave me that win that I needed, because I was talking to the tutor for quite a long time, even in my first session. And granted, it was simple, it was slow, it was awful, it was incorrect, but I did it. And the adrenaline rush and I don't know what other drugs the human body sends around when you get that kind of victory, but I really felt, elated, and it was just an amazing experience. And I can't recommend it enough. So that's the point I want to make about don't give up. And it is a cliche and it's really difficult. Like, don't get me wrong. If you've ever tried studying a language that's quite different from your own, every day you feel like, oh, this is so hard. Why didn't I just learn French or, something simple? And your body or your mind is going to constantly try and trick you into quitting. It's constantly going to say, oh yeah, I'm not made for learning languages. I don't know how. I'm not intelligent enough. It's going to send so many excuses your way for not continuing. And that's the time you really need to keep going. And try to keep going even if you had sort of deadlines. My deadline was to learn Russian in 3 months. I quickly discovered that was absolutely ridiculous and there was no way I was going to do that. And then I said, okay, well, I'll use the entire 2014 to learn Russian. And right now I'm doing very well. I don't want to sort of be overly positive about it because I'm not quite there yet in terms of being a very good Russian speaker, or understanding literature or TV or something. But I'm improving every day, and I'm realizing that my goal of speaking fluently by the new year is somewhat unrealistic still. I think it depends on how you interpret fluency, of course, but I think I can do it. And then next year, I'm going to continue with Russian and sort of get into this intermediate stage where I can watch TV, engage in conversation, read books kind of effortlessly. And while I'm doing that, I might have started a new language, but it's very important that I get to that very sort of high beginner stage before I start to take on a new language. Because, once you get to a stage where you know the grammar of a language, getting to intermediate or advanced stage, it's basically just adding vocabulary a lot of the time, or understanding slang, or these kind of how to use words or sentences like a native. So once you get over the hump of understanding the basics and are able to carry a conversation, then I think you can take on a new language. But I think in general, I would just suggest learning one at a time. I think that's a better way of doing it. But because I've been with Russian so long, I think I'm okay with trying to sort of do a little extra language part-time. I've also had the experience from Esperanto this year, where I did a little Esperanto on the side of learning Russian. And, I'm going to be honest here and say that while I was doing Esperanto, it's hard to do Russian. Because if you're on the Memrise and you want to do vocabulary in Esperanto and you're like, oh yeah, I should do Russian as well, you just don't kind of feel like it. It's hard for the mind to focus on two languages at once. For me, at least, like I have to constantly say this, but this is how I work. Some people really thrive when they mix between languages all the time. I just can't do that. I need the focus. And the entire point of only learn one language at a time could probably have been a full point here in my 10 lessons learned. But yeah, never give up. You'll make it eventually. The next point that I have on my list is finding a purpose of why you're learning the language is quite important. When I started learning Russian, it was sort of a semi-arbitrary decision. It was sort of random. I've been playing a video game, and in that video game, there was a lot of Russian people. And I thought, you know what, that's probably cool. And I realized later that, that's a good enough, I think that's a good enough purpose. If you want to communicate in a game and you want to kind of take part in the Russian area of the game. But a lot of people I've seen recently on the Facebook groups and all over, they just kind of learn for the sake of learning. And I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, that's what I do as well to a large extent. But if possible, find a purpose. And one of the people that really sort of hit this point home was Judith Mayer in episode 3. So if you haven't listened to that, I strongly suggest you go back and listen to it. But basically, she's just like tweaking her language learning based on a purpose. So she learned Japanese to watch a single anime, just one anime. She probably couldn't do conversation or anything, but she could watch that anime and understand it. And she had a Chinese game she wanted to understand, and so on and so forth. So my point is, try to find a purpose and not just, I'm learning French because it's cool. And if it's hard to find a purpose, consider learning another language, or look for inspiration around you. Try to check out the literature. What about the movies? If you go to the Facebook groups, a lot of other people who have learned that language might explain some of the advantages to you. And it's basically all about visualization, right? It's about your brain realizing that there are benefits to learning this language. Because if you don't have that kind of anchor that you can strive towards. It's really hard to learn languages because the mind is, the mind is always one step ahead of you, and it's going to try and tell you, well, why are you learning this? And then you need to have your answer ready, particularly for hard times. My next point is stay consistent. And this is something that I've also struggled with at the first half of the year. And, I kind of regret being such a poor language learner in the first half of the year because I was really, really inconsistent. I was kind of just doing a little bit here and there, and it just didn't add up to much because I was too relaxed about it. I was saying, yeah, I'm a lazy language learner, but at the end of the day, even if you are lazy, you need to have some kind of system. You can't just do it when you feel like doing it. I think that will end up poorly. Of course, you need to have the desire to study the language. I don't want to force people, but I think you should try and build a routine. And for me, it was sort of doing something every day. And I think a lot of the language learners that I interviewed over these 40 episodes was agreeing with me on the point of just simply do something every day, and it doesn't matter how long it is, just get that daily sort of introduction to the language or reintroduction, and you will keep learning. And some of the most accomplished polyglots like Alex Rawlings, he says that studying an hour a day is perfect for him. They're split up into 3 different sessions, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and 15 minutes. And that kind of surprised me, actually, because I thought somebody who learned 12 languages in kind of a small time period would have spent hours every day learning languages, or indeed maintaining them. But it's just not necessary if you stay consistent. So tying in with the second sort of point I had with never give up is stay consistent. If you stay consistent, never give up, you will learn a language. You might not do it in 3 months, but you will do it eventually. And that's all that matters, really. It's not a contest or anything. So that's what I would say about, stay consistent. Try to make some goals, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly goals, and try to stick to them. Try to read the goals to you every day, and just do something every day. That's what I picked up from interviewing all these great people. The next point is get out of the house and socialize. And this has kind of been difficult in previous years, I think, when there was no kind of conferences, there were no meetups, there were no meetup websites, there was no internet to coordinate things. But now that we're living in sort of a technological age, it's so easy to socialize with people with similar interests. So every time that I sort of, log on to Facebook, I check out what other polyglots are doing, other people, and I can see, oh, he's studying, oh, he's doing that, oh, he's doing this. And I just get so motivated by other people. And one of the biggest turning points, not breaking points, one of the biggest turning points for my sort of this year that I'm going to put in my life calendar is the polyglot gathering in Berlin. I just started learning languages. I was just coming off of a pretty horrible sort of depression, didn't know what to do kind of few years. And I came to this polyglot gathering in Berlin, not really sure what to expect. And it just turned out that I met tons of great people, great language learners, and they were so inspirational. And there were so many people that I'm happy to have met and that I am now also happy to call friends today. And if you were at that polyglot gathering, thank you so much for making it so amazing. It was really a fantastic experience, and it changed my life forever. So that's also why I'm looking forward to the next polyglot gathering, which is in May next year. And I'll also be joining the polyglot conference. And basically what I'm doing is just trying to make it the language learning as real as possible. And you might say it's kind of a trick against the mind because if you're learning languages to be able to speak to other people learning languages, it's sort of, is that really what languages were supposed to be designed for? But I don't mind that, actually. I think it's just a way to kind of hack your brain. Because if I consider the polyglot gathering last year, and I only spoke, let's say, 3 languages, it was quite noticeable. The people who spoke, say, 6 or 7 had a lot more sort of going for them. And I'm not trying to, put them on a pedestal or anything or say that, oh, you need at least 7 languages to have fun. I definitely had a ton of fun. That's not the point. The point is that, it's a good hack for your brain to have that kind of event or events. I mean, maybe there's a weekly Russian meetup in your city or a weekly Korean meetup. I don't know. But if you have some kind of commitment to showing up a place and having to practice your languages, you'll find that you work a lot harder on the desk time as well. So for me, getting out of the house and meeting other people is essential. And that's something that I also learned from these interviews, is that making friends in the polyglot community and sort of motivating each other is key to success. And if you're in London on the 10th of December, actually, that's gonna be missed. Oh, well, I was doing an actual fluency meetup in London on the 10th of December, and I think we had a lot of fun. I hope so. Kind of a back to the future moment here. But the point is that I'm also hosting some meetups on actual fluency, and these won't be events. You won't have to pay for them or anything. You just show up and we have some fun, and it'll be in a pub or a bar or something. We can buy a pint of beer and talk languages or language learning. And the first one is, like I said, in London on the 10th of December 2014. So by the time you hear this, we've already done that. But keep a lookout on the Actual Fluency Facebook page for other announcements. I'm planning to do a meetup in Athens this summer. So, if you're in Athens or around the area, just come and say hi, and we'll see. It's all about meeting new people and like-minded people. The next point I wanted to make is that Memrise is really awesome. And I know I constantly harp on about Memrise, and I constantly, praise it, but it is really amazing. And it's amazing because it puts a lot of the thinking it takes a lot of the thinking responsibility away from you. Because if you're doing Anki, you have to constantly decide whether a word is a 1-day word or a 7-day word or a 3-week word or whatever. I forget the options, and they also change per deck, I think. But with Memrise, it's an automated process. And you might say, well, that's slightly less efficient. I actually think it's more efficient. And there's so many courses, there's so many MEMS, memory associations. So if you're not doing Memrise, get on it and do Memrise. And this is, I was happy to be recommended the program by language learners that I've, talked to over the time. And I'm also very happy to be talking to the Memrise people and sort of continually working towards improving the service. And it's free. So there's really I'm not trying to sell anything here, but I think that it has definitely helped me a lot. I think I'm just about to hit 3,000 words on Memrise, which is for, 10 months of work is perhaps not as optimum as it could be. I think I could have done more if I had been more productive during the first part of the year. But, Memrise has sort of taught me 3,000 words in 2 different languages. So I think that's kind of inspirational, and that's why I supported them with my premium membership. It's only $9 a month, and I don't get any commissions out of recommending that, but that's just my personal opinion. I think it's a great company, and they're really doing a lot of science behind the scenes. So the point I have to make here is flashcards are your best friend, and I think Memrise is the best out there right now. But there are alternatives that might work better for you if you want to do something like, be a little bit more independent and sort of choose when the words come back. I would go for Anki. And if you wanted sort of more done for you courses with slightly more professional touch, then I would consider Antosh and Lin. They have flashcards in a lot of languages, so go check them out. Those are kind of the 3 companies I can just name off the top of my head that I would recommend for various reasons, but Memrise is kind of my favorite. The next point I have is about Russian, and I've been talking about Russian a lot in this episode, and I realized that. And if you're not learning Russian or you're not interested in learning Russian, I apologize for that, but it is because that's, my year has been occupied by a lot of Russian, so I had to kind of keep it in here. And the point I wanted to make about learning Russian is one that also applies to other difficult languages. And if you're a Westerner, for instance, learning Asian languages might be difficult. And likewise, if you are from an Asian country, learning the Western languages might be difficult, like something like German or Danish indeed. So when you're learning a difficult language that's very different from your own, and my example here is with Russian, it's really challenging. Like, I had French in school and I did nothing, hardly worked anything, but I still understood it to a large degree, and I learned a lot, and I could actually speak some of it back then. Now I've mostly forgotten it. But the point is that when you're choosing a very different language or a very difficult language compared to your own native language, you have to be prepared to put in more effort than people might sometimes say. And that's not a problem if you just use the other tips. And I said, the only mistake you can do is giving up, get tutoring, and as fast as possible. If you do those things, you'll still learn these difficult languages, but you just have to be prepared that it's a lot more bumpy ride than if you're German and wanting to learn Dutch, or if you're Swedish and want to learn Norwegian. If you pick languages that are very different from your normal one, it's not easy. And I hate this kind of easy, hard decision, because at the end of the day, if you just keep working at it, it's the things involved with learning a language is not difficult or hard. So how can you say that something is not easy? But I think there is a point to be made about there's a difference in the amount of time it takes to learn more difficult languages, and thus I call them difficult. But I just want to say that although it has been a real struggle for me to learn Russian, and I'm still struggling with it, and I'm still learning how to learn, it's also very pleasurable. It gives a high level of satisfaction that you actually succeeded in something unusual. If I go to a party in Denmark, there's only Danish people there, and somebody asks me if I speak French, I say, yeah, I speak French, and they'll be like, okay, that's cool. But if you say I speak Russian, they're like, what? You speak Russian? Oh, that's so cool, And yeah, I know it's about vanity as well. I am not, much into the whole vanity thing, but it is a really cool experience. It's like when you see Moses McCormick doing his kind of videos on the road, the excitement in people's faces is something that he obviously lives and breathes for. When he says he knows like Tibetan and, Hmong and whatnot. So it's very cool. Either way, but I just wanted to make that point that just because everyone tries to make language learning easier, and I do believe language learning in general is easy, it's just put the time in, don't give up, and get help. It is still going to be more difficult if you choose some of these sort of far away languages from your own. So just keep that in mind and don't give up, because once you hit that kind of the wall, where it really hurts to continue and you're like, oh, I don't understand anything. That's the time when you really start learning and you really start enjoying the fruits of your labor. So keep going if you're learning these difficult languages. There's also something to be said about should you in general focus on learning languages that are closer to your own or, far away. And I think the answer to that is just do whatever you want. I don't think that should factor in at all. If you're really into Korean dramas or something, you should learn Korean, even if your native tongue is English. I don't think that you should kind of say, oh, well, I know English, I guess I'll learn French first, and then I'll learn German. And yeah, you can learn those languages quite easily, and learning an easy language before a difficult one is definitely a recommendable option. But don't let your life be governed by the easy way out. Some of the best enjoyments we can get is by learning what is difficult and unusual as well, because even though a lot of people speak these kind of so-called difficult languages, it's quite unusual in some parts of the world, like Russian in Denmark, for instance. So that's what I had about that. The next point is something about don't say you're learning languages. Don't just say you're learning languages, because I know the feeling, right? You go on Facebook and you're like, oh yeah, I'm learning Icelandic. I'm so cool. And I don't mind that at all. I'm sure I've done that here on the blog. I'm like, yeah, I'm learning Russian. I'm like the next, next expert on the Russian language. I'm so cool. And I think people should be allowed to sort of be commended for their efforts. But the problem is when you're asking to be commended on your, what you're saying and not what you're doing. So for instance, my personal example is that on the blog, I had kind of put it out there that my challenge was to learn Russian in 3 months. And I miserably failed, but I already talked about that, due to various reasons. And then once I got back into it, I was really, really lazy. I didn't really do much, but I was constantly saying to people, oh yeah, I'm learning Russian. And, I just think that you should not, if you're saying that, you should really be putting in the effort. You should really be putting in the daily effort. And there's nothing more sad, to me at least, than to meet somebody. And I know people's views are different on this. And I just want to say, I don't mind. People can do whatever they want. But I hate it when I meet people and they say, oh yeah, I'm learning Spanish. And they can't say one word in Spanish. in that sense, I'm learning every language in the world, right? So my sort of the thing that I've learned here is that it's not about what you say you're doing, it's about what you are doing. So you're not going to evaluate yourself on what you say you will do or have done. The only success you're going to get out of your own mind, brain, and happiness is if you actually do what you're saying you're doing. And I'm totally guilty of this. When I started the blog, I was saying that I was learning Russian, and I was, but it was just so slow that I might not have been learning it at all. If you average up the time, I probably spent less than 10 minutes a day. And, as much as I think that less is more in language learning, there's a kind of a tolerance level at some point where if you only spend 5 minutes a day, you're not going to get anywhere. And then I think it's false to go out and say, oh yeah, I'm learning Russian. And in a similar vein, I would really caution people to try and be too much all over the place. I know some people really enjoy learning a little bit of every language and then moving on to a next one. But I would just offer my opinion and say that I'd really prefer to be able to speak something in the language. Because if you just want to learn a few sentences, you can just memorize the phrase book, right? You don't need to know about the grammar of a language. If all you want to do is say, oh, hey, how are you? I'm from Denmark. Where's the toilet? And this differs from person to person. Some people love just learning a ton of languages, but not really knowing much with them. And I think that I've made it my mission that for every language I sort of study, I want to be able to use them in active conversation. And the example I had was I met a girl in Germany, and in a bar. It was sort of a meetup for Danish and German relations. And we were sitting there talking, and it turns out she'd studied tons of languages at her university. And she was like, oh yeah, I studied 15 languages or something. And, I don't mind people sort of showing off. Again, I think people are quite, we're into vanity, right? It's about how we're perceived by others. But I then kind of talked to her in some of these languages, and it was just like, for Russian, she didn't even understand, how are you? And then I'm like, did you really study the languages? Oh, yeah, she did a semester. Well, isn't that a shame to spend an entire semester and not be able to understand how are you? I'm not judging here or anything. I'm just saying that this is something that I've learned doing the interviews, is that practicality for me beats sort of this, I don't know what you want to call it. It's a bit of an obsession to travel between different languages very quickly. And I know some people really enjoy it. So that's why, I'm not going to say, oh, that's wrong or anything. If that's your goal, to sort of investigate languages, that's fine. But don't say you sort of speak the language at least, or don't say that you're learning it. If you're learning about it, that's fine. But the lesson that I've learned from people that I've interviewed is to practicality is sort of the number one. Languages are meant for practicality. And if the way you're studying a language is preventing you from using it practically, then I think you've sort of spent your time at the wrong place. And this is a totally opinionated lesson, sort of a point. So if you have different opinions on this matter, I totally respect them. It's not like I'm trying to convert people to my way of thinking. I'm just saying this is something that I realize, is that you can learn a language quite the wrong way. And I was doing that with Esperanto, for instance. I was only learning vocabulary. And when I came to the sort of an Esperanto meetup, I couldn't say anything because I only knew the nouns and the verbs. I didn't know the glue words or the pronouns or anything. So, the takeaway here is difficult languages, learning languages should have an end goal. And I would say if you don't have a particular end goal, I think it should always be to be able to speak it. And I'm not saying, speak with in a highly academic level about very technical aspects. No, that's not the point. The point is just simply to be able to speak and communicate with people, with native speakers of the language. And that will kind of be my go-to strategy. The final point that I have for you today, and before I get into that final point, I just want to say thank you for listening with me so far. I haven't done a solo episode in a while, and I kind of like doing them sometimes, but I just wanted to ask you your opinion on the format here. Do you like me kind of going over some of these things that I've learned? Or do you think that I'm a little bit too boring, a little bit too ranty? Anything you want to add to the discussion, just add it to the comment section, because it's not something I do very often. So I'm just interested to know if you want more of this, or if, any suggestion and comment is welcomed. The last point I want to make, and like I said, I haven't organized these points in sort of importance, because I think that's a stupid thing to do for language learning. Everything is important. So the last point I have here is never miss an opportunity to practice your target language, and also seek it out if possible. And this kind of ties in with the make friends and socialize or get out of the house point from earlier. The point is that you should always take every opportunity to practice your language you can. So that means if you have, like, at your house, if you're learning Russian, well, have a Russian book that you can put on your toilet when you have to. We all have to go to the toilet, right? Might as well spend the time wisely. Or if you're traveling a lot, if you're using public transportation, have your book, have your podcasts in the languages that you're learning. And if you see if you're learning, I don't know, Arabic, and you see an Arabic store in your city, just go in and say hi to people and just sort of use a few sentences as much as you can. They'll be really happy for it, and you get some extra good confidence to keep going. And I had a story recently where I went to the public library recently, and I was in the Russian section, and there was a Russian girl there who came up to me and started talking, and I just got so kind of dumbfounded by that. I made a one sentence reply, and I kind of left. But now that I look back, I was like, there's so few Russian people or Russian speakers in my city, so why did I just run away? It's a hard lesson to learn. But basically, the most successful language learners that I've interviewed are the people who sought out ways to practice their language, and that was through meetups, regular meetups in their home city, tutoring on Skype, all these services like pen pal services or language exchange services, friends, family, anything you can do to practice the language is perfect. And I really encourage you to seek out all these kind of opportunities to practice it. And it's something that I'll be working on in 2015 to try and seek out more ways to practice Russian, because I think that's what I'm lacking right now. And I could really benefit from some speaking practice. I talk to my tutor every week, but when you speak to the same person, it's not as organic, because you already know a lot about the person. And when you then meet somebody out in the real world, all the questions from sort of the first lesson pop up again. And I think that's what I need practice in. But that was my sort of 10 lessons that I have learned from interviewing over 35 language learners. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and indeed this format is a little bit different this week, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway, and I'll look forward to meeting or inviting a new interviewee onto the show next week. And then we're not too far off from episode 50. And I think the half century episode is quite special. So I've got some special sort of ideas lined up, and I hope they will become a reality. And then I'll make episode 50 really special for you guys. So as always, thank you for listening to the podcast. And if you have time to review the podcast on iTunes, I'd really appreciate it. It really helps the show reach more people, more aspiring polyglots, more language learners. And you can find the show on iTunes, search for Actual Fluency Podcast, or simply actualfluency.com/iTunes will also direct you to the iTunes webpage, and you can ask to launch the iTunes app through that website, and then leave a review using your Apple account. And like I said, I really appreciate the people who have already done that. I love you guys, and look forward to being in your ears again next week. All right, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. For more information, be sure to check out actualfluency.com. Until next time, enjoy learning and have a great day.